that lots of jokes at Prime Minister's questions, but the Prime Minister trying to come out fighting. Let's get some analysis now from Jill Rutter, who's Senior Fellow at UK in a Changing Europe, an independent research organisation, also part of the Institute for Government, a former senior civil servant at Number 10. Jill, we've talked many times about the political situation at the moment, but another twist and the departure of the Home Secretary we're hearing in the last few minutes. What do you make of that?
Well, it just underlines, I think, how unstable this government is. That this time last week, Kwasi Kwarteng was Chancellor, Suella Braverman was Home Secretary. Now we have Jeremy Hunt installed as Chancellor, and we're about to get another Home Secretary. Only the third Home Secretary this year, but none of this really is conducive to very good government, because anything that is making progress, just chopping and changing ministers at this rate, is really quite destabilising, but also it raises more question marks about how long the Prime Minister can really hang on.
And I was going to ask you that. What does this latest departure from the government, and we don't yet know everything about the circumstances of Suella Braverman's departure, what does that do for the Prime Minister's chances? Because, as you say, it just reeks of instability, doesn't it?
It does look very unstable, but you're right that until we know quite why Suella Braverman went, or whether Liz Truss indeed asked her to leave, then we can't, whether it was about policy differences. We do know that there were some differences emerging between the line Suella Braverman was taking at the Home Office on loosening up immigration and the line that Liz Truss wanted to take. So whether it's policy differences or whether it's something completely different, we don't really know. The other question is, who does she appoint? There are stories going around that she appears to be about to appoint Grant Shapps. If she does that, then it's a really second big shift in the composition of that cabinet, because just as Jeremy Hunt was a Rishi Sunak backer who ran himself for the leadership, Grant Shapps was another person who'd backed Rishi Sunak, and that seemed to be why he didn't appear in Liz Truss's initial lineup. So what we're getting is the cabinet being reconstructed at pace, but may raise big question marks about where some of the people who backed Liz Truss, wanted her with a cabinet with people like Kwasi Kwarteng and Suella Braverman in it. What do they now make of, a reconstructed lineup with some of the people who backed, in the highest positions of state, some of the people who backed Rishi Sunak for leader? Whether it's a unifying move or what, we will have to give it a day, maybe a week, to see if things don't move too quickly for that.
Yeah, just underlining, Jill, that Chris Mason, our political editor, as he was saying to us a few minutes ago, said that this was not over a policy difference, this resignation, if that's what it was, by the Home Secretary, but an honest mistake, and we don't know what that honest mistake might have been. But we do know that Suella Braverman was a critic of Liz Truss's U-turn on the top rate of tax, and thought that the Prime Minister had fallen victim to a coup, was what she said at the time. So there were differences, certainly, but this appears to have been, according to our political editor, all because of some sort of mistake. And as we were reflecting earlier, Suella Braverman did have leadership ambitions of her own, didn't she, Jill Rutter?
She did. She ran in the leadership election, and she did really quite well. She was actually first out of the blocks, declaring her candidacy before Boris Johnson had even stepped down, and did command quite a bit of support from the, if you like, the European Research Group faction within the Conservative Party. I think I think it's really important here that Number 10, and for the stability of the government, that Number 10 do clear up exactly why Suella Braverman has, if she's been asked to leave government, has been asked to leave government. If it's a security-related matter, they may not want to go into chapter and verse, but I do think they would need to say this actually isn't about policy, it's not about personalities, it's not because Suella Braverman has resigned to go out and launch an attack from the sidelines at Liz Truss. It is because she did something, and we're a government that, unlike Boris Johnson's government, feels that ministers have to be held to the highest standards of behaviour. So I think it really is important that we get a bit more clarity.
Well, actually, Jill, I can just tell you that Chris Mason is saying there was a breach of the ministerial code. Just explain to us what the ministerial code is, actually, and why that would be a reason for a departure from government. Chris Mason saying, I am told the Prime Minister was advised that the ministerial code had been broken by the Home Secretary.
So the ministerial code is issued by Prime Ministers, and it basically sets out how ministers are to conduct themselves in public office. You'll remember notoriously with the former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, she was investigated to see whether she'd breached the ministerial code over her argument with her former Permanent Secretary, Philip Rutter, that she'd been bullying officials. The investigation by the then independent ethics advisor, I don't think Liz Truss has appointed an independent ethics advisor, really did find that there was substance to those allegations against Priti Patel. But Boris Johnson famously decided not to ask Priti Patel to resign, even though it looked as though she had broken the ministerial code. So this could be Liz Truss, just in the same way as she handled the Conor Burns incident at party conference. This could be Liz Truss trying to signal that she is running a very different sort of government to the Boris Johnson one, and it is one where breach of the ministerial code will not be tolerated in the way perhaps that they were by Boris Johnson. And we remember that a lax approach to standards was at least one of the big contributing factors to Boris Johnson's downfall.
I'm hearing, I'm not 100% sure if this is true, that Suella Braverman would be the shortest serving Home Secretary since the Second World War at just over 40 days, 43 days. But again, going back to our point about governmental instability, we're on to our fourth Chancellor in just a few months, and now, of course, the Home Secretary is gone as well.
Yes, I mean, I think a lot depends on whether they can install somebody who looks like a safe pair of hands, and it may be that if really something quite serious has happened. Remember the reissuance of the ministerial code by Boris Johnson. The ministerial code was amended in line actually with recommendations from the Committee on Standards in Public Life to say that not every offence needed to require a ministerial resignation. There were lesser sanctions like an apology could be done. So we might assume that this might be quite a serious breach of the ministerial code if Liz Truss thinks it's justified asking Suella Braverman to leave the government. But it's quite difficult to disentangle all of this at this stage. But in terms of the people trying to get on with government business, it's really quite difficult to, almost have to be asking, who's our minister today? That isn't a recipe for great government. So we have to hope that things settle down quite a bit. But, if she's appointing someone who's got quite a lot of cabinet experience, maybe gets on the brief quite quickly, you could say Suella Braverman hadn't had that long in post. But I do think you're probably right, because everybody's had to go back to the fact that Kwasi Kwarteng, with his very short tenure, was the second shortest serving Chancellor, because Ian MacLeod died very early on in the Heath government of a heart attack. And I can't remember, not in my experience, has there been a Home Secretary with a shorter tenure than that.
Jill Rutter, thank you so much for your very early reaction to this breaking news that Suella Braverman has gone from the government. And we speak to